We read Brian's Return by Gary Poulsen, and these are our reviews. I give Brian's Return by Gary Poulsen 4 out of 5 stars because I liked it, but I didn't. It was a pretty interesting story, but not in the way I wanted it to be. The best part about Brian's Return was when he got into a fight with Carl, and he almost went into the wilderness with almost nothing.
I gave Brian's Return 3 out of 5 stars. I gave it 3 out of 5 stars because sometimes it didn't really make sense at some parts. The best part was when he was face to face with a bear. It was cool when the deer jumped in his canoe and almost broke the canoe. Brian knew that it was the mosquitoes that was making the deer all wound up. But I didn't know why Brian still wanted to stay in the wilderness. The most exciting part was when Brian saw the bear. I thought that the bear was going to attack him. I also thought that Brian would shoot the bear, but then I knew that it wouldn't do any damage to the bear, and the bear would just get mad. That's why I rate this book 3 out of 5 stars. Gary Poulsen did a pretty good job on writing too. I could visualize everything he wrote. He is a good author. He is one of my favorites and has a lot of books that I can't wait to read.
I rated Brian's Return 4 out of 5 stars. The best part of the story was when Brian took an arrow to the knee. I thought that it was a great book. It was well written. Then he went first, but before I can't read my own hand. But before he went out into the woods, he beat up Carl, which is awesome. The favorite part of that part was when he made him temporarily blind. I loved almost everything about this book. Gary Poulsen is a great author. This is by far my favorite book by him. I could visualize every detail. But then there was some of it that wasn't as good. I almost fell asleep when he was talking to Billy.
I voted this book 2.5 out of 5 stars because I didn't like it. The best part was whenever Brian got hit in the face by Carl. The most exciting part was whenever Brian beat the poop out of Carl. This book, at least, I thought was boring. Gary Poulsen just made it boring, with no drama or anything. He rode in a canoe with a coffee can making smoke. Woohoo, that's awesome. The bear didn't even attack him. He slept under a canoe. Well, that's just jolly. Why would people care about that? A stupid deer jumped in his canoe. Who in the world even would come up with that?
I give Brian's Return by Gary Poulsen 3 out of 5 stars because it's exciting sometimes and a bit sappy. It's exciting the most when Brian crossed paths with the bear. The bear is said to be playing with him, which I really like. It's a bit sappy when Caleb, Brian's counselor, cries at Brian's stories. Brian tells Caleb stories about the sunset when he was stranded in the wilderness, and it makes Caleb cry almost every time. The best part was when the deer jumped into Brian's canoe. I liked how it was described to have a cloud over its eyes, but really turned out to be those pesky mosquitoes, and it was temporarily blind.
I gave Brian's Return 4 out of 5 stars because of how descriptive Gary Poulsen was with the characters and the setting. He described them in such a way that I felt like I was there with Brian, experiencing all kinds of wild things. My favorite part was when Billy arrived at Brian's camp and told him about his medicine. It was a really good twist in the story, and I enjoyed it a lot. The most exciting part was when Brian beat Carl unconscious with tiny, swift punches. Gary Paulson was very descriptive when he described Billy sitting by the fire while he and his hands talked to Brian. He described it as Billy talked with his hands as well as his voice, the palms waving, the fingers pointing, dancing with his hands as well as he spoke, and almost music. This is a very beautiful way to say such a simple thing, but I find it enjoyable. Gary Paulson was also very visual when he described Carl being punched unconscious by Brian. The way he described it made me feel like I was there. This is why Brian's Return got 4 out of 5 stars.
I thought Brian Returns was not that good, so I rated it 1 out of 5 stars. My reason is it wasn't exciting all the way, just 3 or 4 times in the story. One is it didn't say what happened to Brian at the end of the story, because I really wanted more detail. All it said at the end, he would follow his medicine deer, but I want more detail. I really did like it when the deer jumped in the canoe because it had really good detail that I saw it in my head like a movie. One of the details was you could see the flies in the can and the flies squirming away. And you could see Brian too. Okay. I liked it when he met Caleb because he sort of made Brian go back. The reason is because Caleb asked him to talk about the woods, so it made Brian go back because he saw how beautiful it was. I really liked it when Brian wrote with detail what he was buying. The reason for this is because he said one of the items was a bow, like this wood glass laminated as pulled as 26-inch arrow. It gave really good detail about the bow, so that's how I rated it.
I rate Brian's Return 3.5 out of 5 stars. Yes, I just did a fraction. The reason I rate 3.5 is because there wasn't enough action, and it didn't compare to the first book, Hatchet. The best part for me was the scene with the bear when it was playing with him. But I think But I also think when I criticize, why didn't he visit the Smallhorns in the book, even though he said he was going to? And why did he just go back? Then, had the bear moved towards him again, he said he would have released the arrow, and it also mentions the Smallhorns. What about him? Didn't you want to visit them, the pilot said to him? Brian thought, oh yeah, why didn't I think of that? But yet he never still visited them. That is what I think of Brian's Return.
I gave Brian's Return by Gary Paulson 5 out of 5 stars. I could have had done more, but Mr. Shivers said 5 out of 5 is the maximum amount. I gave this book the maximum amount of stars because it was extraordinary, because it was very detailed about the story. Here is one of them. Billowing from the deer. The eyes were clouds of something that resembled smoke. Later, when Brian had time to think, he decided to think it was flies. The most exciting part is the book is everything. Oh my, I can read it 1,000,000 times. I know people may disagree, but I understand that people love and dislike his books by Gary Paulson. But I love Gary Paulson's book, Brian's Return.